The folded apron rested quietly across Olivia Carter's arm as though it still belonged there. Around her, the restaurant remained frozen in a silence so complete that even the gentle jazz drifting from hidden speakers seemed strangely out of place. Nobody reached for another bite of food. Nobody asked for another refill. Every pair of eyes followed the young black waitress standing in the center of the dining room with a calmness that felt almost impossible after what had just happened. Daniel Whitmore looked at his watch before speaking again. "Please collect your personal belongings and leave the building immediately." His voice carried no anger, only certainty. To him, the decision had already been made. Olivia lowered her eyes for only a moment before nodding politely. "Yes, sir." There was no pleading, no argument, no attempt to defend herself. She simply folded the apron a little more carefully and turned toward the employee hallway. As she passed the service station, several coworkers instinctively stepped forward. Emily, another waitress who had worked beside Olivia for nearly 3 years, grabbed her hand gently. "Olivia, this is not your fault." Olivia offered the same warm smile she had given countless guests over the years. "Take care of table 12 for me." The gentleman there asked for extra lemons with his iced tea. Emily stared at her in disbelief. "You are worried about your tables?" Olivia shrugged softly. "They should still have a good lunch." Tears immediately filled Emily's eyes. Nearby, the young busboy named Tyler stood completely motionless, his face pale with guilt. He could barely bring himself to look at Olivia. "Miss Carter." His voice trembled. "It was me." Olivia stopped walking and turned toward him. Tyler looked no older than 19. He had started working at the restaurant only 2 weeks earlier to help pay community college tuition. His hands were still shaking. "I bumped into you," he whispered. "You did not spill anything." "I did." Olivia stepped closer until they stood only a few feet apart. She smiled kindly. "Accidents happen." Tyler swallowed hard. "I should tell him." Olivia gently shook her head. "Not today." "But you are losing your job. You are trying to build your future." Tyler stared at her, unable to understand how someone who had just been fired could still be protecting him. Olivia placed one reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Learn from today." She paused before adding quietly, "Do not let one mistake convince you that you are one." Tyler lowered his head as tears rolled freely down his cheeks. From across the dining room, Daniel noticed the brief conversation but chose not to interrupt. In his mind, the situation had already ended. Standards had been enforced. The restaurant could move forward. He turned toward the general manager, Karen Mitchell, who had arrived moments after hearing the commotion. "Fill the vacant section immediately." Karen hesitated. "Sir, Olivia has managed this dining room longer than anyone else." Daniel looked at her without expression. "Then your staff should already know how to replace her." Karen nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir." Yet inside, she knew the answer was different. Restaurants could replace uniforms. They could replace schedules. They could even replace experience. But replacing the person everyone trusted when things went wrong was something entirely different. Olivia entered the small employee break room where her faded blue backpack rested inside an aging locker. She quietly removed a framed photograph tucked against the back wall. In it, she stood beside her younger brother Marcus on the day he received his college acceptance letter. Both of them were laughing. Their late mother had taken the picture only months before her illness began. Olivia slipped the frame carefully into her backpack before checking her phone. A new message from Marcus appeared on the screen. "Big chemistry exam today. Wish me luck." Olivia smiled despite everything that had happened. She quickly typed back, "You are going to do great. I believe in you." She never mentioned losing her job. Some burdens could wait until evening. Zipping the backpack closed, she took one final look around the empty room before switching off the light. As she walked toward the front entrance carrying nothing but her belongings and quiet dignity, she had no idea that, within the next hour, the same restaurant that had asked her to leave would desperately need the very person it had just let go. Olivia Carter pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped onto the busy Chicago sidewalk. The afternoon air carried the distant sound of traffic, construction equipment, and hurried conversations from office workers filling the downtown streets. She paused for only a moment, adjusting the strap of her faded blue backpack before taking a slow breath. Behind her, the elegant restaurant continued serving lunch as though nothing unusual had happened. Inside those walls, another waitress would soon carry her tables. Another employee would fold napkins where she had stood only minutes earlier. Life inside Whitmore Prime would continue. At least that was what everyone believed. Olivia walked toward the corner of the block, passing rows of flower planters, polished storefront windows, and business professionals rushing between meetings with coffee cups in their hands. She reached into her pocket and felt the familiar shape of a small silver keychain her younger brother Marcus had given her years before. It was scratched from daily use, but she smiled anyway. Some things became more valuable with time, not less. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from Marcus appeared. Exam finished. I think it actually went well. Olivia smiled warmly and typed her reply while waiting for the crosswalk signal. I knew you could do it. I am proud of you. She pressed send before slipping the phone back into her pocket. She still chose not to mention the job. Marcus had worked too hard to reach college. She refused to let today's disappointment distract him from tomorrow's future. Back inside Whitmore Prime, however, the atmosphere remained strangely unsettled. Emily struggled to keep up with Olivia's section while simultaneously covering her own tables. Guests who had always requested Olivia quietly noticed someone else serving them. Small details began slipping through the cracks. A birthday dessert arrived 5 minutes late. An elderly couple had to ask twice for extra butter. A businessman waited longer than expected for another cup of coffee. None of the mistakes were serious. Yet together they slowly changed the rhythm of the dining room. Karen Mitchell noticed immediately. She walked briskly between tables, helping wherever possible while trying not to let guests sense the growing pressure. She finally reached Daniel Whitmore, who was reviewing inventory reports near the host stand. Sir. Daniel looked up briefly. Yes. Lunch service is falling behind. Adjust the floor assignments. We already have. Karen hesitated before continuing. Olivia usually coordinates the dining room without anyone realizing she is doing it. Daniel remained expressionless. Then your supervisors should learn to do the same. Karen nodded, although the answer did little to solve the problem. Daniel returned to his paperwork. Efficiency had always been simple in his mind. Identify the problem. Remove it. Improve the system. He believed organizations succeeded because standards never bent for individuals. Across the dining room, Tyler carefully stacked clean glasses near the beverage station, but his concentration had disappeared completely. Every time he reached for another tray, he replayed the moment Olivia accepted responsibility for his mistake. His stomach tightened with guilt. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he approached Karen. Ma'am. She turned toward him. Yes, Tyler. He lowered his voice. Mr. Whitmore fired the wrong person. Karen studied his face. Tell me what happened. Tyler swallowed hard before explaining everything from beginning to end. The crowded aisle. His shoulder brushing Olivia's tray. The few drops of iced tea. Olivia immediately cleaning the chair before any guest was inconvenienced. Karen listened without interrupting. When he finished, she closed her eyes briefly. Why did you not say something sooner? Tyler looked toward the front entrance where Olivia had disappeared less than 15 minutes earlier. She asked me not to. Karen looked across the restaurant toward Daniel, who was still calmly discussing quarterly performance numbers with an assistant manager. She knew exactly how he would respond. The decision had already been made. Admitting a mistake in front of employees was something Daniel Whitmore had never been known to do. Before Karen could decide whether to approach him, a loud crash echoed from the private dining room. A serving tray struck the floor. Glasses shattered harmlessly across the polished tiles. Someone shouted for help. Another voice called for the manager. Every conversation inside the restaurant stopped at once. Karen and Daniel looked toward the private dining room simultaneously. Neither of them knew that within the next few minutes, a far more important decision than firing a waitress would confront everyone inside Whitmore Prime. The sound of breaking glass echoed through Whitmore Prime like a warning no one had expected. Conversations stopped instantly. Every head turned toward the private dining room where a cluster of guests had suddenly risen from their chairs. One woman covered her mouth. Another hurried backward, knocking into a nearby server. Karen Mitchell was already moving before anyone else reacted. "Excuse me," she called while weaving between tables. Daniel Whitmore followed several steps behind, his polished shoes striking sharply against the marble floor. As they entered the private dining room, the scene came into focus. An elderly businessman sat slumped in his chair, his complexion unusually pale. A crystal water glass lay shattered harmlessly on the floor beside him. One hand rested weakly against the edge of the table, while the other trembled uncontrollably. His breathing had become shallow. His wife knelt beside him, her voice shaking with fear. "Someone please help him." A young server stood frozen beside the table, clutching an untouched tray. "Stop talking," the server whispered. "He said he felt dizzy." Karen immediately knelt beside the gentleman. "Sir? Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, but he struggled to answer. Daniel stepped closer, scanning the room. "Call an ambulance." One employee immediately reached for the restaurant phone, while another searched for the first aid kit, kept near the manager's office. The guests instinctively stepped backward, creating space around the table. Fear spread quietly through the room. Nobody wanted to interfere. Nobody seemed to know what to do next. The elderly man's wife looked desperately from face to face. "He is diabetic," she cried. "He took his insulin this morning, but he barely ate lunch." Karen's heart sank. She understood enough to know the situation could become dangerous, but not enough to know exactly what to do. Daniel looked toward the first aid kit that had just arrived. Bandages, ice packs, antiseptic wipes. Nothing that answered the fear in the woman's voice. "Where is the ambulance?" someone asked. "They are on the way," another employee answered. They said several minutes. Several minutes suddenly felt far too long. Tyler stood near the doorway, his breathing becoming faster as he watched the elderly man's condition worsen. Then one thought struck him with overwhelming force. Olivia. She would know. He remembered the quiet conversation only minutes earlier. He remembered her telling him to learn from mistakes instead of letting them define him. Without stopping to think, Tyler turned and ran. "Tyler!" Karen called after him. "Where are you going?" He did not answer. He pushed through the front entrance and burst onto the crowded sidewalk. Office workers turned in surprise as the young busboy looked frantically up and down the busy Chicago street. There, nearly half a block away, Olivia was waiting at a crosswalk, her blue backpack resting against one shoulder while she stood patiently beside a newspaper stand. "Miss Carter!" Tyler shouted with everything he had. Olivia turned immediately. Even from that distance she could hear the panic in his voice. Without hesitation she started walking back toward him. Tyler reached her out of breath. "Please," he gasped. "You have to come back." Olivia gently placed one hand on his shoulder. "Slow down. What happened?" Tyler struggled to catch his breath. "A customer collapsed. They said he has diabetes. Nobody knows what to do." Olivia's expression changed instantly. Not to fear. To focus. She looked toward the restaurant entrance where frightened guests had begun gathering near the windows. For the briefest moment she glanced back at the city street stretching ahead of her. She had already been fired. She had every reason to keep walking. Every reason to leave the restaurant behind forever. Instead, she quietly adjusted the strap of her backpack and asked only one question. "Is he still conscious?" Tyler nodded quickly. "Barely." Olivia did not ask whether Daniel wanted her back inside. She did not ask whether she would be thanked. She did not ask whether anyone would apologize. She simply turned around and hurried toward the restaurant doors because in her mind, someone needing help had always mattered more than someone hurting her feelings. Behind the glass entrance, Daniel Whitmore looked toward the lobby just as Olivia Carter stepped back into the restaurant she had been ordered to leave less than 20 minutes earlier. The moment Olivia Carter stepped back through the front doors of Whitmore Prime, every conversation in the restaurant seemed to disappear. Guests who had watched her leave only minutes earlier now watched her return with quiet confusion. Daniel Whitmore looked up from across the dining room, his expression hard to read. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Olivia did not look at him. Her attention had already shifted toward the private dining room where frightened voices continued calling for help. She walked quickly but calmly, her footsteps steady across the polished marble floor. Tyler followed close behind, still breathing heavily. "He is over there," he whispered. Olivia entered the private dining room and immediately knelt beside the elderly businessman. His skin had become noticeably pale, tiny beads of perspiration covered his forehead, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. His wife looked up with desperate hope. "Can you help him?" Olivia spoke gently. "I am going to try." She turned to the gentleman. "Sir, can you hear my voice?" His eyes opened slightly. He managed the smallest nod before closing them again. Olivia looked toward his wife. "You said he has diabetes?" "Yes." "Did he take insulin today?" "This morning." "Has he eaten much?" Tears filled the woman's eyes. "Only a few bites." "He said he was not very hungry." Olivia nodded. Everything she was seeing pointed in the same direction. She looked toward Karen. "Does anyone have orange juice? Regular soda? Anything with sugar?" Karen answered immediately. "Yes. Please bring it now." Two employees hurried toward the kitchen. Olivia remained beside the gentleman, speaking softly the entire time. "Stay with me, sir. Keep looking at me. You are doing well." His breathing remained shallow but steady. Daniel stood several feet away watching every movement. He noticed something surprising. Olivia was completely focused. There was no sign of resentment, no hesitation. Nothing in her face suggested she had been humiliated only moments earlier. She behaved exactly as though she still belonged there. A server returned carrying a glass of orange juice. Olivia carefully took it and looked at the gentleman again. "Sir, can you swallow?" He nodded weakly. She helped him take a very small sip before waiting several seconds. Then another. His wife held his hand tightly, whispering quiet encouragement through tears. The room remained completely silent except for Olivia's calm voice. Slowly, "That is enough for now." After another minute, the trembling in the gentleman's hands began to lessen. Color slowly returned to his face. His breathing became deeper. The tension that had filled the room softened just enough for several guests to release the breath they had been holding. Karen looked at Olivia with amazement. "How did you know what to do?" Olivia kept her attention on the gentleman. Low blood sugar can become dangerous very quickly. She looked toward the entrance. The paramedics should still examine him when they arrive. Almost on cue, the distant sound of ambulance sirens drifted through the afternoon traffic outside. Relief spread across the room. The elderly businessman slowly opened his eyes again. This time they remained open. He looked at his wife and managed a faint smile. "I am all right." She covered her face with both hands as tears of relief rolled down her cheeks. "Thank God." Moments later, the paramedics entered carrying medical equipment. Olivia calmly summarized everything she had observed, the symptoms she had recognized, and the small amount of juice the gentleman had been able to drink. The lead paramedic listened carefully before nodding with clear respect. "You made exactly the right call. Keeping him responsive before we arrived likely prevented this from becoming much more serious." Daniel heard every word. He looked from the recovering guest to Olivia, then toward Tyler, whose eyes remained fixed on the floor. The restaurant that had seemed perfectly organized only half an hour earlier suddenly felt very different. Daniel realized that every procedure, every policy, every inspection checklist he had ever written had been completely useless in the one moment that truly mattered. The person he had dismissed as replaceable had quietly become the one person everyone had depended on when a stranger's life needed immediate care. And for the first time since becoming chief executive officer, Daniel Whitmore began to wonder whether the greatest mistake in his career had not been a failed investment or a bad business decision, but the moment he asked the wrong person to walk out the front door. The ambulance doors closed gently as the paramedics prepared to transport the elderly businessman to the hospital for further observation. Before leaving, the lead paramedic turned toward Olivia Carter once more. "You recognize the symptoms quickly," he said with genuine admiration. "That made all the difference." Olivia offered a modest smile. "I am just glad he is going to be all right." The paramedic nodded. "You should be proud of yourself." She lowered her eyes slightly. "His family being able to go home together is enough." As the ambulance pulled away from the restaurant, the crowd that had gathered outside slowly dispersed. Guests quietly returned to their tables, but the atmosphere inside Whitmore Prime had changed completely. The elegant dining room no longer felt like a place concerned only with flawless service and polished appearances. For the first time that afternoon, conversations centered around gratitude instead of reservations, business deals, or expensive meals. Daniel Whitmore remained standing near the entrance of the private dining room. He had not spoken for several minutes. His attention never drifted far from Olivia, who was calmly helping employees gather, overturn chairs and clear away broken glass as though she were simply finishing another ordinary shift. Karen approached him cautiously. "Sir." Daniel looked up. "Yes." She came back even after. Karen stopped herself. Daniel understood the unfinished sentence. "Even after I fired her." Karen nodded quietly. Daniel watched Olivia thank one of the servers for bringing fresh linens before helping another employee reassure a frightened guest. There was no resentment in her face, no bitterness in her voice. She had every reason to leave the restaurant behind forever, yet she had returned without asking for recognition, without expecting an apology, and without reminding anyone how unfairly she had been treated. Daniel spoke almost to himself. "Why?" Karen looked at him. "Why would she do that?" Karen smiled gently. "Because that is who she is." Daniel frowned slightly. "You make it sound simple." "Sometimes it is." Karen folded her hands. "Olivia has always believed that helping people matters more than proving people wrong." Those words lingered in Daniel's mind. Across the dining room, Tyler slowly approached Olivia. His eyes were still red from crying. "Miss Carter." She turned with the same patient smile she had shown him earlier. "How are you doing?" Tyler looked down. "I should have told the truth the moment it happened." Olivia rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You are telling it now. Because you saved someone." "No." She gently shook her head. "Because you learned something." Tyler finally looked up. "Will you ever forgive me?" Olivia smiled warmly. "There was never anything to forgive." Tyler's shoulders relaxed for the first time all afternoon. Daniel had witnessed business negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but somehow that brief exchange carried more wisdom than many executive meetings he had attended throughout his career. Forgiveness had arrived without conditions. Compassion had been offered without being requested. At that moment, Karen quietly handed Daniel a thin employee personnel file she had retrieved from the office. "You should read this." Daniel opened it absent-mindedly. The first page listed Olivia Carter's employment history. Nearly 4 years without a single disciplinary action. Perfect attendance except for approved family leave. Outstanding customer reviews. Consistently high performance evaluations. He turned another page. Employee recognition awards. Volunteering for extra shifts. Mentoring new staff members. Handwritten thank you notes from longtime guests. One note simply read, "She remembers every customer as though they were family." Daniel continued reading. Another page documented that Olivia had repeatedly covered shifts for coworkers dealing with illness, childcare emergencies, and unexpected family crises. She had never requested special recognition. She had never asked for additional compensation. She had simply helped. Daniel slowly closed the file. The weight in his hands suddenly felt much heavier than paper. He looked across the dining room toward the woman he had dismissed in less than a minute. Every decision he had made that afternoon had been based on one brief misunderstanding. Yet nearly 4 years of integrity had already been quietly written inside that file, waiting for someone to care enough to read it. For the first time in a very long time, Daniel Whitmore realized that leadership was not measured by how quickly a person could judge a mistake, but by whether they were humble enough to recognize one of their own. The afternoon rush gradually settled into an unusual calm. Plates were cleared. Fresh glasses replaced the broken ones. Soft jazz once again floated through the dining room, but something invisible had changed inside Whitmore Prime. Guests spoke more quietly than before. Servers moved with greater care. Even the kitchen seemed less hurried, as though everyone had been reminded that perfect meals mattered far less than the people sitting around the tables. Olivia Carter picked up her backpack from where she had left it near the entrance. She had already decided it was time to leave for good. Her help was no longer needed, and she had no intention of lingering where she had clearly been told she did not belong. She adjusted the strap over her shoulder and quietly started toward the front door. Olivia! Daniel Whitmore's voice stopped her halfway across the dining room. Every employee nearby instinctively looked up. Olivia turned politely. Yes, sir. Daniel walked toward her without the confident stride that usually announced his presence. For the first time all afternoon, he looked like a man carefully searching for the right words instead of assuming he already had them. When he finally stopped in front of her, several seconds passed before he spoke. Would you come into my office for a few minutes? Olivia studied his face. She saw no anger there, only uncertainty. Of course. Karen quietly signaled the staff to continue working while Daniel led Olivia upstairs to the executive office overlooking the restaurant. Through the large glass windows, the dining room stretched below them like a carefully organized stage where every employee continued serving guests. Daniel closed the office door behind them. The room felt strangely quiet. Awards lined one wall. Framed newspaper articles covered another. A polished mahogany desk stood before the windows with financial reports neatly stacked beside a silver pen holder. Olivia remained standing. Daniel noticed. Please have a seat. She sat calmly in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Daniel remained standing for another moment before slowly taking the chair across from her instead of sitting behind the desk. It was a small decision, but one that changed the conversation before it even began. He opened Olivia's personnel file once more. I finished reading this. Olivia smiled politely. It has been a while since I looked at it myself. Daniel gently ran his fingers across the pages. 4 years. He looked up. Not one formal complaint. Olivia nodded. I always tried to do my best. Employee of the month 7 times. She shrugged modestly. There are many hard-working people here. Daniel continued reading. Dozens of handwritten compliments from guests. Olivia smiled faintly. Some people are very kind. He closed the file again and leaned back in his chair. Why did nobody ever tell me any of this? Olivia looked surprised by the question. Sir, I knew your name. Daniel looked toward the dining room below. But I never knew you. Silence settled between them. Daniel let out a slow breath. This morning I believed I understood exactly what kind of leader I was. His voice had lost all trace of authority. Now I am not so sure. Olivia remained quiet, allowing him to continue at his own pace. When I saw what happened with that glass. He paused. I never asked what actually happened. Olivia lowered her eyes briefly. No. I never asked anyone else. No. I never gave you an opportunity to explain. Olivia answered softly. No, sir. Daniel rested both hands on the desk. I made a decision in less than 30 seconds. He looked directly at her. And I nearly lost the best employee in my restaurant, because I valued being certain more than being fair. Olivia did not rush to respond. She simply listened. Daniel's eyes drifted toward the city skyline beyond the windows. Do you know what has been bothering me most? Olivia waited. It is not that I made a mistake. He smiled sadly. Every leader makes mistakes. He looked back at her. It is that after I treated you the way I did, you still came back when someone needed help. Olivia answered without hesitation. The gentleman did not fire me. Daniel lowered his head for a moment. Those 5 words carried more weight than any criticism could have. In that quiet office overlooking the restaurant he had spent years building, Daniel Whitmore realized that the woman sitting across from him possessed something no title, promotion, or corner office could ever guarantee. She understood that character was measured by how people responded after they had every reason to walk away. Daniel Whitmore remained silent long after Olivia's words settled into the room. The gentleman did not fire me. They were simple words spoken without bitterness or accusation, yet they echoed louder than any criticism he had ever received. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Olivia, the afternoon sun stretched across the Chicago skyline, casting long bands of golden light over the dining room below. Employees continued serving guests, carrying trays and greeting customers with practiced smiles. Life inside Whitmore Prime had resumed. But Daniel knew something inside him had permanently shifted. He slowly stood and walked toward the window. Do you know why I built this company? Olivia remained seated, listening quietly. Daniel folded his hands behind his back. My father owned a small neighborhood diner. A faint smile crossed his face. He used to tell me that people returned because they trusted us. His smile slowly faded. When he retired, I promised myself I would build something bigger, better, more successful. He looked down at the busy dining room below. Somewhere along the way, I became so focused on protecting the business that I forgot what made people trust it in the first place. Olivia watched him without interrupting. Daniel turned back toward her. I believed perfection created loyalty. He shook his head slowly. Today I learned that people remember how they are treated far longer than they remember whether their water arrived 30 seconds late. Olivia smiled gently. People usually forgive mistakes. Daniel nodded. They rarely forget disrespect. The room fell quiet again. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a folded sheet of paper. It was the termination notice he had signed less than an hour earlier. He looked at it for several seconds before carefully tearing it in half, then into quarters. Finally, he placed the pieces into the recycling bin beside his desk. Olivia looked at him with quiet surprise. Daniel took a slow breath. Olivia Carter. His voice carried none of the authority it had held earlier that afternoon. I owe you more than an apology. He sat back down across from her. I would like to offer you your position back immediately. Olivia looked at him kindly but did not answer right away. Daniel continued. Your employment will be fully restored. You will receive compensation for today's lost hours, and I will personally explain to every employee that I made the wrong decision. Olivia appreciated the sincerity in his voice, yet she remained thoughtful. Daniel noticed. You are not sure. She smiled softly. I believe your apology is genuine. But Olivia folded her hands in her lap. If I come back because you feel guilty, nothing really changes. Daniel listened carefully. If I come back because you have decided to lead differently. She paused for only a moment. Then everyone who works here benefits, not just me. Daniel lowered his eyes. Those words reached further than he expected. She was not negotiating for herself. Even now, she was thinking about the next employee who might one day make an honest mistake. Karen quietly knocked before opening the office door. I am sorry to interrupt. Daniel looked up. What is it? Karen smiled warmly. The gentleman who was taken to the hospital asked me to call. Olivia immediately stood. Is he all right? He is doing very well. Karen nodded happily. His wife wanted me to tell you, he is expected to make a full recovery. Relief spread across Olivia's face. That is wonderful. Karen then looked toward Daniel. She also said there is something you should know. Daniel waited. Her husband recognized Olivia. Olivia looked surprised. Recognized me? Karen nodded. Several years ago, when you were still working as a nursing assistant, you cared for his late sister during her final weeks in hospice. Olivia searched her memory before a quiet expression of recognition appeared. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks. Karen smiled. He said your kindness gave his family peace during the hardest time of their lives. Daniel slowly turned toward Olivia. The realization settled over him with unexpected force. She had not become compassionate because of today's events. She had been quietly changing lives for years, long before she ever carried a serving tray through his restaurant. At that moment, Daniel understood something that no business school had ever taught him. Exceptional employees were not created by company policies. They arrived with character that no training manual could ever manufacture. Karen quietly closed the office door behind her, leaving Daniel Whitmore and Olivia Carter alone once again. Neither of them spoke immediately. The news that the elderly gentleman had recognized Olivia lingered in the room with quiet significance. Daniel looked down at the torn pieces of the termination notice resting inside the recycling bin. Only an hour earlier he had believed he understood exactly who Olivia Carter was. Now he was realizing he had never truly known her at all. Why did you leave nursing? He asked gently. Olivia looked toward the city skyline outside the window before answering. My mother became sick. Daniel listened carefully. She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Olivia's voice remained calm, though a quiet sadness rested beneath every word. Hospital shifts became impossible. Someone had to be with her in the mornings and evenings. Daniel nodded slowly. So you chose a restaurant because the schedule gave you more flexibility? Yes. You never tried to go back? Olivia smiled softly. Every family makes sacrifices. She paused. Mine just happened to look different from most. Daniel found himself thinking about his own calendar. Every hour had always been scheduled weeks in advance. Investor meetings, executive lunches, board presentations, quarterly reviews. He suddenly wondered how many important moments had quietly disappeared while he had been chasing the next achievement. His phone rested on the desk beside him. Almost without thinking, he unlocked it. A familiar name appeared near the top of his recent calls. Sophie Whitmore. His daughter. 3 missed calls over the past 2 weeks. 1 unanswered voicemail. Daniel stared at the screen longer than he expected. Olivia noticed but said nothing. Finally, Daniel smiled sadly. She stopped calling as often. Olivia looked at him with gentle understanding. Children usually stop asking after they believe no one is listening. The sentence landed softly, but it carried tremendous weight. Daniel looked out the window again. She invited me to dinner last month. He laughed quietly, though there was no joy in the sound. I told her we would schedule something after earnings season. He closed his eyes briefly. Earnings season ended 2 weeks ago. Olivia remained silent, allowing him to continue. She never asked again. The office became still except for the distant sounds of dishes being cleared downstairs. Daniel finally looked back at Olivia. I always believed I was working hard for my family. Olivia nodded. Most people do. But somewhere along the way, he searched for the right words. I started working instead of being present. Olivia smiled gently. Success can be a wonderful servant. Daniel looked curious. But it becomes a terrible master. Daniel quietly repeated the sentence to himself. Felt painfully true. A light knock interrupted the silence. Karen stepped inside holding a small envelope. Olivia, this arrived for you yesterday. It was accidentally placed with the office mail. Olivia accepted it with surprise. The envelope contained a handwritten letter folded neatly inside. She unfolded the paper carefully. Daniel watched as her expression softened. Good news? He asked. Olivia smiled with tears beginning to gather in her eyes. It is from Marcus. Your brother. She nodded. He received a scholarship. Daniel smiled genuinely. That is wonderful. Olivia looked down at the letter again. He wrote that he wants to become the kind of person who helps people the way our mother taught us. She quietly folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Daniel realized something extraordinary. Olivia had never spoken about money. She had never complained about losing her income. She had never used her family's struggles to gain sympathy. Even after everything that had happened, the first news that brought tears to her eyes was not about herself. It was about her younger brother's future. Daniel slowly stood from his chair. Olivia. She looked up. Before you decide whether to come back. He took a careful breath. There is something I need to do first. Olivia saw a different man standing before her now. Not simply a chief executive officer. A father. A leader. Someone finally willing to correct a mistake instead of protecting his pride. And for the first time since walking into Whitmore Prime that afternoon, Daniel Whitmore understood that the next decision he made would determine far more than the future of one employee. It would reveal the kind of man he truly intended to become. Daniel Whitmore opened the office door and looked down over the dining room one more time before speaking. Please come with me. Olivia Carter quietly followed him downstairs. The restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm, but the moment Daniel appeared beside Olivia, every employee instinctively looked up. Servers paused beside their tables. Cooks leaned through the kitchen window. Even several guests recognized that something important was about to happen. Daniel stopped in the center of the dining room where he had dismissed Olivia less than an hour earlier. He slowly turned toward his staff. May I have everyone's attention, please? The room became silent once again. This time, however, the silence felt different. It was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with expectation. Daniel looked around at every face before speaking. Earlier today, I made a decision that I believed protected the standards of this restaurant. He paused. I was wrong. Several employees exchanged surprised glances. No one could remember hearing Daniel Whitmore admit a mistake in public. He continued. I judged an employee before I understood the truth. I acted before I listened. I allowed authority to replace fairness. He turned toward Tyler, who stood quietly near the beverage station. Tyler. The young busboy stepped forward nervously. Yes, sir. Daniel smiled gently. You have something you wish you had said earlier. Tyler swallowed hard before nodding. He faced everyone in the restaurant. The accident was my fault. I bumped into Miss Carter while carrying glasses. She protected the guests before thinking about herself. She never blamed me. His voice trembled. She even told me not to let one mistake define who I become. The dining room remained completely still. Daniel looked toward Olivia. Instead of telling the truth, she chose to protect a new employee. He took a slow breath. Then, after I fired her, she returned to save a guest without asking for anything in return. He looked around the room once more. That is the kind of person I should have recognized before making any decision. Daniel stepped closer to Olivia. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology in front of every person who witnessed what happened today. Olivia looked at him quietly. I treated you unfairly. I failed to show you the respect every employee deserves. I am deeply sorry. The words settled gently across the restaurant. Karen smiled quietly. Emily wiped away a tear. Several guests who had remained after the emergency watched in respectful silence. Daniel continued. Effective immediately, Olivia Carter is fully reinstated with all pay restored. He paused again. More importantly, beginning today, no employee in any Whitmore restaurant will ever be terminated before a complete review of the facts has taken place. Karen looked genuinely surprised. Daniel nodded toward her. I will personally revise our leadership policy this week. He turned back toward the staff. Standards matter. But people matter first. The sentence lingered in the quiet room. Olivia finally spoke. Thank you for saying that. Daniel smiled faintly. You were right earlier. Olivia looked at him curiously. Coming back only because I felt guilty would not change anything. He glanced around at the employees standing together. Changing how we lead might. Olivia saw something she had not seen before. His apology was no longer about correcting one mistake. It had become the beginning of a different culture. Tyler slowly stepped toward Olivia and held out her neatly folded black apron. I kept this for you. Olivia accepted it with a grateful smile. She unfolded the familiar apron, ran her hand gently across the fabric, and looked around the dining room filled with coworkers who no longer appeared afraid. At that moment, she realized she had not returned simply to recover a job. She had helped create a place where the next person who made an honest mistake might be treated with understanding instead of humiliation, and that quiet possibility felt far more valuable than anything written on a paycheck. Dinner service resumed with a sense of calm that nobody inside Whitmore Prime had experienced before. The tension that had filled the restaurant only an hour earlier had slowly given way to quiet conversations and genuine smiles. Olivia Carter tied her black apron once again and returned to the dining room, not because she had forgotten what had happened, but because she believed the guests deserved the same kindness they had always received. As she walked past the host's stand, several regular customers smiled with visible relief. One elderly woman reached out gently. We are happy to see you back. Olivia smiled warmly. Thank you. I am happy to be here. Across the dining room, Daniel Whitmore watched the exchange without interrupting. He noticed something he had somehow overlooked for years. People were not simply greeting a waitress. They were greeting someone who had become part of their lives. One businessman asked about her younger brother because he remembered hearing about his college acceptance months earlier. A retired teacher thanked her for recommending a low-sodium meal during her last visit. A young family introduced their little daughter, who proudly waved at Olivia as though greeting an old friend. Daniel quietly realized that customer loyalty had never been built by expensive furniture or elegant menus alone. It had been built one conversation at a time by people like Olivia. Karen joined him near the entrance. Do you see it now? Daniel nodded slowly. I spent years studying numbers. Karen smiled gently. She has always studied people. Daniel laughed quietly. And somehow that turned out to be the better investment. Karen looked toward Olivia, helping an elderly gentleman comfortably adjust his chair before serving his meal. She remembers birthdays, anniversaries, food allergies, favorite desserts, the names of grandchildren. Daniel watched in silence. Every thoughtful gesture happened naturally, without effort or expectation of recognition. A few minutes later, his phone vibrated inside his jacket pocket. He looked down. A message from his daughter appeared on the screen. Tomorrow at 7. Do not be late. I already made reservations. Daniel smiled before typing his reply. I will be there early. He hesitated for a second before adding another sentence. Thank you for giving me another chance. Moments later, her answer arrived. I have been waiting for you, Dad. Daniel read those words twice before quietly placing the phone back into his pocket. Across the room, Olivia noticed the small smile on his face. She did not know what message he had received, but she sensed something inside him had finally become lighter. Near closing time, Tyler carefully approached Olivia carrying a small brown paper bag. I almost forgot. She looked at him curiously. What is this? He smiled shyly. The kitchen made your favorite vegetable soup after you left earlier. Chef wanted to make sure you still had dinner. Olivia looked genuinely touched. That was thoughtful. Tyler grinned. People have been taking care of each other all afternoon. Olivia laughed softly. That sounds like a good habit. Daniel overheard the conversation from across the dining room. He looked around the restaurant one more time. Employees were helping one another without being asked. Guests seemed more relaxed. The atmosphere itself felt warmer. Nothing about the building had changed. The walls were the same. The tables were the same. The menu was the same. Only the hearts inside it had changed. Daniel slowly understood that leadership was never about creating fear strong enough to prevent mistakes. It was about creating trust strong enough for people to give their very best every single day. As the last guest stepped into the cool Chicago evening, Daniel quietly thanked each employee before they left for the night. When Olivia reached the front door with her backpack over one shoulder, he simply smiled and said, Good night, Olivia. She smiled back. Good night, Mr. Whitmore. There was no awkwardness left between them, only mutual respect. And for both of them, that simple exchange somehow felt like the most valuable success either had achieved all day. The next morning arrived with clear skies stretching above downtown Chicago, and for the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore walked through the front doors of Whitmore Prime nearly an hour before opening. The dining room was quiet except for the gentle sound of silverware being arranged and fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. Instead of heading directly to his office, he remained near the entrance, greeting each employee as they arrived. Some looked surprised. Others smiled cautiously, unsure whether this change would last. Daniel greeted every person by name. Whenever he could remember it and when he could not, he politely asked. He quickly realized how many people had worked for him for years without ever having a real conversation with him. Olivia Carter arrived carrying her familiar blue backpack over one shoulder. She stopped for a moment, slightly surprised to find Daniel holding the front door open for incoming employees. He smiled warmly. Good morning, Olivia. She returned the smile. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. As she walked toward the employee hallway, Daniel noticed several new hires entering behind her. They looked nervous, whispering quietly as they clipped on their name tags. Karen Mitchell approached with a folder in her hands. Today is orientation for our newest staff members. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Would you ask everyone to gather in the dining room before opening? A few minutes later, servers, hosts, bussers, cooks, and managers stood together between the neatly arranged tables. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, filling the restaurant with a warm glow. Daniel stood before them without a microphone or prepared speech. He simply looked around the room before speaking. Many companies teach policies first. He paused. Today we will begin with people. The employees listened quietly. Daniel continued. Yesterday I made the worst leadership decision of my career, because I believed assumptions were faster than understanding. He glanced briefly toward Olivia, who stood near the back beside Tyler. I judged someone before asking a single question. Several of the new employees exchanged curious looks, unaware of what had happened the previous afternoon. Daniel smiled gently. From today forward, every manager in every Whitmore restaurant will remember one rule before making any decision. He spoke slowly enough for everyone to hear. Listen completely before you judge. Respect completely before you correct. Silence settled over the room. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It felt thoughtful. Daniel then looked toward Olivia. Would you join me for a moment? Olivia walked to the front, slightly embarrassed by the unexpected attention. Daniel smiled. Many of you will work beside Olivia. He looked around at the new employees. You will notice that guests remember her name. Co-workers trust her. Families ask for her section. He paused again. That did not happen because someone gave her authority. It happened because she earned trust one small act of kindness at a time. Olivia lowered her eyes modestly. Thank you, sir. Daniel shook his head gently. No. He smiled. Thank you. Tyler quietly began clapping. Emily joined him. Within seconds, the entire staff applauded, not loudly or dramatically, but with genuine appreciation. Olivia felt her face grow warm. She had never enjoyed being the center of attention, yet she understood this moment was no longer about her alone. It was about the kind of workplace everyone hoped to build together. As opening time approached, employees returned to their stations with renewed energy. Daniel watched them for a moment before his phone vibrated again. It was a simple message from his daughter. See you tonight, Dad. Daniel smiled, slipped the phone into his pocket, and looked across the dining room where Olivia was laughing with Tyler, while helping one of the new servers learn the table numbers. For the first time in many years, Whitmore Prime no longer felt like a restaurant driven only by excellence. It had become a place where excellence and compassion finally belonged together, and Daniel understood that changing one policy had improved the business, but changing one heart had changed everything. 6 months passed quietly, yet anyone who walked into Whitmore Prime could feel that something had changed long before a menu was ever opened. The restaurant was still elegant. Crystal glasses still reflected warm afternoon sunlight. Fresh flowers still decorated every table. The food remained exceptional. But now there was something guests mentioned more often than the menu. They talked about the atmosphere. They talked about how every employee smiled sincerely. They talked about feeling welcomed the moment they stepped through the doors. Olivia Carter continued wearing the same simple black apron, greeting every guest with the same kindness she had shown from her very first day. She never asked anyone to remember what had happened that afternoon months earlier. She simply continued serving meals, remembering birthdays, learning children's names, and making strangers feel like honored guests. One Friday afternoon, Karen Mitchell entered the dining room carrying a national business magazine. She placed it gently on the service counter beside Olivia. I thought you might like to see this. Olivia looked down at the cover. Daniel Whitmore stood smiling beside employees from several different Whitmore restaurants. The headline read, "Leadership begins with listening." Beneath the photograph appeared a short quote. The greatest lesson my company ever learned came from an employee I failed to understand. Olivia smiled softly before closing the magazine. I hope people remember the lesson more than the story. Karen nodded. I think they will. Later that evening, the restaurant doors opened once again. Daniel entered alone, wearing a simple navy jacket instead of an expensive business suit. There were no assistants following behind him, no investors waiting nearby. He greeted the hostess with a warm smile before quietly making his way through the dining room. Several employees waved naturally as he passed. He greeted every one of them by name. When he reached Olivia's section, she approached carrying a menu. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. Daniel smiled warmly. Good evening, Olivia. He looked around the busy restaurant before speaking again. It feels different in here. Olivia glanced toward the families laughing together, the elderly couple sharing dessert, and Tyler confidently training a new busboy near the beverage station. People usually notice when they feel respected. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. So do employees. Olivia smiled. Especially employees. Before she returned to her tables, Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully removed a small laminated card. He handed it to her. Olivia looked down. It was Tyler's original employee name tag, preserved inside clear plastic. On the back, Tyler had written a short message in careful handwriting. "Thank you for showing me that one mistake does not define a person." Olivia looked up, visibly moved. Daniel smiled. "He asked me to give it to you today. He was accepted into the management training program this morning." Olivia's eyes filled with quiet happiness. "He earned it." Daniel nodded. "He says he wants to become the kind of leader who listens before judging." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. They simply watched the restaurant around them. The gentle conversations. The smiling families. The employees helping one another without being asked. The atmosphere itself had become the greatest proof that people truly shape a business far more than policies ever could. Daniel finally stood from his chair. "Thank you, Olivia." She looked at him with quiet curiosity. "For what?" He smiled with complete sincerity. "For refusing to let one unfair moment change the kind of person you chose to be." Olivia's smile was gentle, almost effortless. "Kindness is easier to keep than regret." Daniel quietly repeated the words to himself before walking toward the exit. As the evening sunlight poured through the front windows, casting a warm golden glow across the restaurant, Olivia returned to her guests exactly as she always had. She never became famous. She never became wealthy. She simply remained faithful to her character. And in doing so, she reminded one chief executive officer, one young employee, and countless people who walk through those doors that respect is never created by power. It is earned through the quiet choices people make when nobody expects kindness, yet someone offers it anyway.